Right, so the purpose of this particular video is to give you a better feeling or a better visual of exactly how a callback works and why we implement them so much in JavaScript. So I've started ahead of time. I created two very simple JavaScript functions, function do homework and function what subject. And there shouldn't be anything overwhelming about this at this point in time. We first call do homework, and then it's going to console log a thing, and then we're going to call what subject, and it's going to create a variable called math, and it's going to console log that. And so using Node.js, I'm going to type in node and callback.js, and it should do exactly that. All right, so just as a progression to remind ourselves how things work and to give us a visual of what we're going to accomplish very shortly, I'm going to comment out the console log, and instead of console logging it, I'm going to return it. So return subject. And the idea there is that I kind of have the horse before the cart here. I'm going to move what subject here. And the idea is that I'm going to get the subject from what subject and send it to do homework, and then allow do homework to print out the subject of the homework. So that sounded a lot scarier than it actually is. So we're going to return subject from this function, which means we have to catch it in a variable. And then the idea was that I'm going to send that value that got returned into do homework. So I'm going to send it to do homework, which means do homework has to catch it. All of these variable names can be the same. I'm just separating them just so you can see the flow. And then what we'll do is utilizing this ES6 string interpolation syntax. I can put a subject here, recognize that these are backticks. This is a backtick, this is a backtick, which is the key above the tab key, usually shift and tab. So it's not an apostrophe. I think we've gone over that in some other videos. Anyway, so the idea here is that I'm going to get the value from what subject and then send that value into do homework. And so then when I run it, I am getting now starting my math homework. And if I put in JavaScript, which is probably more appropriate, then I should be getting JavaScript homework. All right, so this should be a review, but it's to give a visual of the progression of what I want to accomplish in callbacks. Okay, so through the magic of television, I, since the last take, created a new file in the same folder. Just to give us a visual, I'm going to progress what we've done here into our callback example. So I'm going to keep this side by side just to kind of give you if you need a memory of the direction that we went in. And so I kind of went back to where I started from, where I have a function called do homework, and I'm just console logging that homework. I have a function called what subject, and that's kind of where we started on our first part of the video. And so now if I run that, I just didn't do a callback to, I didn't do a check to make sure I didn't have any errors. So yes, I don't have any errors. So that's good news. So what I'm going to do, for example, in this particular video to demonstrate, or this example to demonstrate what a callback is and how it works, which is the whole purpose here, not a review of functions. I'm going to create a new function. Maybe if I stop talking, I'll remember to write the word function. There it is. Function create message. And I will have it console.log. So what am I going to console log? Well, I'm going to put a greeting of some kind in here. And we should all be pretty comfortable with what this is doing. I'm going to comment out those two for the moment. And we're just going to run our create message function. And it looks like we need to send it something and put that something in my console log. So console log greeting. And we're going to send it a greeting, which is going to be aloha. So not callbacky yet, but we're getting to that. So let me just make sure that's working. Okay, so I've created a function that is sending a value to greeting and then console logging out that greeting. So that's super cool. All right, so how does that work with this? Well, the idea here is that this function is going to do what we did here through the magic of callbacks. So in other words, Let's see, the first thing we did was we printed out what subject, right? So what I'm going to do is in this create message, I'm going to create a second variable that's going to be what subject. Now it doesn't have to be named the same thing as the function, but my idea here is that I'm going to send create message, this entire function, via a variable. So what that means is when I send create message, I'm going to make a comma because my second argument has to be, in my creation here, a function. So the name of the function that I want to send is, we'll send, what are we doing? We're sending what subject? Is that what I want it to do first? Yes. Okay. So I'm going to send what subject, which is named after the function. So I need to actually send that function name. So let me just, for clarity, show you that this is not the same name. So we'll do it this way. All right, so I'm going to send a function, this particular function, so those names have to match. I'm sending this entire function into this variable when I call this greeting, this create message function. And so the idea there is that I can run it anywhere within my code that I want. So I want it to come after greeting. So the name of that variable is what, which contains a function. So I want to remember parentheses. Let me reiterate a point before I get back to that. Remember that I did not send what with parentheses because parentheses says run that function right now. I don't want to run the function right now, so therefore there's no parentheses. I'm just sending that function to this variable. So now this variable in essence is this function. So when I want to run it here in this within this create message function, now I need the parentheses because I'm saying at this point in time on line 15, I want you to run this function. Well, this function, because of this variable, is this function here. And so now we're actually displaying that console information. So let's go ahead and run that so we can see it happening. So now we can see that the JavaScript is, let me clear my screen and do it again just so we can see. We're getting Aloha, which is run at this point in time. And we call this a callback function because based on the order in which we are running it in this function, we have control of when this is being called. So greeting, I'm actually sending a function. Console log greeting is going to console log that. And at this point in time, run this function. I hope that's not confusing. Sometimes I try to explain so much that I hope I'm not explaining too much and making it more confusing. So, all right, well, let's see if I can make it even more confusing in order to make it less confusing. That was really confusing. All right. So the idea now that I'm going to do is I'm going to send, I also want it to now do homework after it console logs the subject. So I'm going to add a third argument to my create message function, and I'm going to call it, what shall I call it? I'll call it homework. Okay. And so just to reiterate or to practice again, what am I sending to this function? I'm sending this function name without the parentheses. So I'm going to copy it so I don't have to fat finger a mistake. So now I'm sending a second function into create message, and that is the do homework function, so that I can call it here from this next line. So after 15, after this function runs, then run homework. So again, homework is a function that is just sitting in a variable name. And if I put parentheses, that will actually run that function after the what runs. So let's see that happen. Okay, so that's all great, but the last piece of the puzzle that we did here was we actually had what subject return a value, and we sent that value into do homework. So how are we going to do that in here? All right, so we're going to do the same thing. We had a subject in here, so we need to kind of replicate the the framework here. And so then we put a subject into our console. So we're replicating what we did earlier. And then here we had a return instead of a console log. So let's do that. So return, we're going to return a subject. So here's where it gets interesting. Just like we did here, where we caught the variable, we caught the value into this variable, and we sent that variable to do homework. We're going to do the same thing here, where we're going to catch the variable. So I'll do the same thing here just for a visual, hopefully, something to associate. So we're going to take whatever gets returned from what, which is a variable reference to this function, which is going to return the subject. It's going to put it into a subject. Okay. The next line is calling function homework, which expects to receive something. And so we're going to send it a subject. So to give you a visual, and I'm not going to leave it up here because I just am kind of a temporary, recognize that I'm just copying this. Recognize that what I've done, in essence, with homework is, hopefully this is not confusing, is as if I have placed this function on this line. So this and this line 17 and 18 through 21 are synonymous, okay, because we're just putting in whatever we got from our return of what into here. So we're just using it as a variable name that got sent into this function instead. Hope that was, if that was confusing, then ignore it. If it wasn't confusing and you went, then yay, I'm glad I did it. So let's just see if it works, and then I'll rehash what we did. So starting my JavaScript homework. Okay, so let's just, we're doing view frameworks. So let's see if we get that changed so I know that it's working. Starting my view framework homework. So it is working. So just to reiterate, Aloha is going into greeting, which is console logging greeting. Nobody has a problem with that. Along the same lines then, what subject is the name of this function. So instead of sending a string, I'm sending a function to this argument. I can then run that argument within this create message. It's a local variable to this function that I can call using the parentheses any point in this function that I want to run. So when this what runs, this function runs, which is a variable name for this function, it's going to return whatever, in this case, we just hard coded in a string. So it's going to return that string. That string is going to get returned to this variable. We're going to send that string to homework, HW, which is a variable containing this function. When we call that function expects to receive something, which we sent it. We sent it to whatever got returned from the line above. And then it's going to console log that. So the way that we're controlling a callback is this idea that we can have variables and as functions, and we can control when those functions are run. In other words, we're making sure that this homework function is being run after console simply because we're putting it in that order in this particular function.